They were promised something no prisoner of the Soviet state was ever promised: freedom. All they had to do was not fall asleep for 30 days. What the researchers found behind that door on the 15th day would never appear in any official record, because officially none of this ever happened. The men were not soldiers, they were not volunteers, they were 5 political prisoners, enemies of the state, already condemned, already forgotten. To the men running the experiment, they were perfect, expendable, and desperate enough to agree to anything. The offer was simple and impossible: survive 30 days without sleep inside a sealed chamber and walk out free men. No bars, no labor camps, no firing squad at dawn, just 30 days of consciousness. To keep them awake, the researchers had a tool: an experimental airborne stimulant pumped continuously into the chamber. In the few surviving accounts, it is given only one name: Nikolaev gas. It was their lifeline. It was also their poison, and it would never, ever be turned off. The first days were ordinary, almost pleasant. They talked about home, about the wives and children waiting on the other side of those 30 days. They shared the small horrors that had brought them all to that room, and in the sharing they bonded. 5 strangers became something close to friends. They read every book in the room. They told every story they had. And slowly, without ever announcing itself, the warmth began to drain out of the light. This is the part people forget when they tell this story: that before the horror, there were just 5 tired men trying to stay kind to one another. Remember them this way. You won't be able to for much longer. Around the 5th day, something changed. They stopped talking to each other, and they started talking to the microphones. At first, the researchers couldn't make out the words. When they finally amplified the feeds, they wished they hadn't. Each man was secrets, not his own, the others'. Confessions, betrayals, the most damning, private things their fellow prisoners had told them in those first warm, trusting days. They were informing, each one trying to make himself useful to the men behind the glass, each one trying to be the one who walked out. The friendship of the first days hadn't faded. It had become ammunition. On the 9th day, the silence broke. One of them began to scream. He ran the length of the chamber, wall to wall, screaming at the top of his lungs, for hours, until something in his throat simply gave way. And here is the detail that has haunted readers for decades. The others did not react. They did not try to help him. They did not even look at him. They were busy. While their friend destroyed himself, the others were calmly covering the portholes, tearing apart the books they had once treasured, pasting the soiled pages over every pane of glass, smearing them with the contents of the chamber, until the researchers could no longer see in. The men inside no longer wanted to be watched. They wanted to be alone with the gas. And then came the worst part of all: the quiet. For days there was no sound from the chamber, no screaming, no whispering, no movement they could hear. The microphones picked up only the hiss of the gas, and every so often the sound of breathing, so they knew the men were alive. They simply didn't know what was alive in there anymore. On the 15th day, the researchers made a decision. They would stop the gas, open the door, and end the experiment. They announced this over the intercom, and for the first time in days, a voice answered them. We no longer want to be freed. They cut the gas before they opened the door, and the moment the fresh air rolled in, the men began to scream, not in relief, but in something closer to agony. They were begging for the gas to be turned back on. What they found inside, I will not describe in full. The accounts are deliberate, and they are merciless, and they have given a generation of readers nightmares. The food they had been given sat untouched, spoiled where it lay. The men had not eaten. They had found other ways to occupy themselves. What they had done to their own bodies over those days of silence cannot be undone by any doctor, and should not be pictured by any sane mind. They had torn into themselves, and they were still somehow alive. One of the soldiers raised his weapon, and one of the men, the last one still able to form words, looked up at him and smiled. "We are the madness that lurks within you all, begging to be free at every moment in your deepest animal self. We are what you hide from in your beds every night. We are what you sedate into silence and paralysis when you go to the nocturnal haven where we cannot tread.